My wife, Stacy, is incredibly supportive of my work. She knows I spend my days buried in dense academic research and Microsoft Teams meetings, and when I'm not doing that, I'm traveling to some corner of the earth to torture safety professionals with tangents about metrics and KPIs. She also knows that when I'm off the clock, my brain doesn't really shut off. The other day, she was reading an article on SciPost. Now, Stacy does not spend her free time reading the Journal of Safety Research, but she sent this article to me anyway. I don't think she expected it to become a podcast episode. I think she just thought it was an interesting piece of psychology. But as I read it, I had an absolute light bulb moment because it gives us a brand new quantitative way to look at a topic that normally makes my blood boil. If you listened to episode 106 last year, you know exactly what word I'm talking about. The C word. Complacency. I went on a massive tirade in that episode about how complacency is a vile word. It is a lazy investigator's scapegoat used to blame a worker for simply achieving mastery of their job. When a human gets good at something, according to the Dreyfus mental model, their brain uses less cognitive power to do the basics. It goes on autopilot. It is a natural, expected biological function. Yet, traditional safety management is obsessed with trying to fix it, usually by blaming the worker when that autopilot fails to recognize a sudden systemic anomaly. But what if we stop trying to fix the worker? What if we acknowledge that the autopilot is going to happen and instead we design safety training that biologically hijacks their brain to temporarily switch it off? And what if the secret to doing that isn't a threat, but a thrill? Let's dive in, folks. It's an all-new Prove It To Me. Welcome back to Prove It To Me. I'm your host, Dr. Matt Law. Let's rewind the clock a bit. Back in episodes 108 and 109, we did a deep dive into scare tactics in safety training, what behavioral scientists call threat appeals or fear appeals. We looked at the extended parallel process model and proved that showing a worker a graphic video of a severed hand or a fatal accident usually fails to change their behavior long term. Why? Because of efficacy. If you scare someone, but you don't give them a highly effective, highly controllable way to mitigate that fear, their brain rejects the message. They go into fear control instead of danger control. They look away, they get defensive, or they just tune you out. So, the conventional wisdom became, or at least it should have become, don't use fear. Fear is bad. Fear paralyzes. But then Stacy sends me this article. It was published in October 2025 by Karina Petrova in SciPost, summarizing a brand new peer-reviewed study by Yuting Zhan and Zhu Ding. This study was published in the journal Psychology, Research, and Behavior Management, and it is titled Fear-Pleasure Paradox in Recreational Fear, Neural Correlates and Therapeutic Potential in Depression. Now, you are probably asking, Dr. Law, why are we talking about clinical depression on an occupational safety podcast? Stick with me. The neuroscience here is going to blow your mind, and it completely validates what we talked about in episode 106. Zhan and Ding were investigating the fear-pleasure paradox. Why do people voluntarily go to haunted houses? Why do we pay money to watch horror movies? Why do we enjoy being scared? They specifically wanted to look at how this recreational fear affects individuals with depression. Depression is often characterized by an inability to experience pleasure, but neurologically, it is also characterized by something called hyperconnectivity between two specific brain networks, the default mode network and the salience network. Let's break those down, because this is the crux of the safety application. The default mode network, or DMN, is the part of your brain that is active when you are not focused on the outside world. It is the autopilot network. It's active during daydreaming, mind wandering, and self reflection. The salience network, on the other hand, is your brain's alarm system. It detects and filters important external and internal stimuli. It tells your brain, hey, pay attention to that thing right there. In a depressed brain, the autopilot, DMN, and the alarm system, salience, get unhealthily linked, leading to constant rumination. The researchers hypothesized that an intense, controlled fear experience might temporarily disrupt that connection by forcing the brain to completely abandon its internal thoughts and hyperfocus on the external environment. So, they ran a two-part study. In study 1, they took 216 adults with varying levels of depressive symptoms and sent them through a professionally designed haunted attraction. They hooked them up to heart rate monitors, took saliva samples to measure cortisol, and had them rate their fear and enjoyment. They found the classic inverted U shape. As fear went up, enjoyment went up to a point. It hit a sweet spot of optimal fear and then dropped off if things got too scary. But study 2 is where the magic happens. They put 84 participants with mild to moderate depression inside an fMRI scanner to measure real time blood flow in the brain and showed them a series of short, scary horror movie clips. They took baseline brain scans before and resting scans after. During the scary clips, the participants' brains lit up in the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the area critical for emotion regulation and processing safety signals. And here is the kicker. After watching the horror clips, that hyperconnectivity between the default mode network and the salience network was temporarily disrupted. The fear experience forced the brain to stop wandering. It pulled the participants out of their own heads. The brain essentially hit a reset button, shifting away from the autopilot. The researchers noted this was temporary, but the neurological mechanism is proven. Controlled recreational fear disrupts the default mode network and forces the salience network to take over. All right, so let's put our safety professional hats back on. Why did this give me a light bulb moment? Let's go back to the C word, complacency. Neurologically speaking, what lazy investigators call complacency is simply a worker operating heavily in the default mode network. Think about a worker who has been driving the same route or doing the same assembly task for 5 years. They have achieved mastery. Their brain is conserving energy. It has shifted the task entirely to the DMN. They are on autopilot. When a sudden systemic anomaly occurs, a pedestrian steps out or a machine jams, we rely on their salience network to fire up and say, danger, stop daydreaming and hit the brakes. But if they are too deep in the DMN, the salience network fires too late. So, how do we train them to make that mental switch faster? Historically, we sit them in a break room and show them a PowerPoint. Does a PowerPoint disrupt the default mode network? Absolutely not. It encourages it. Or, as we talked about in episodes 108 and 109, we show them a gory video of a forklift accident. We use a threat appeal. But a gory video isn't recreational fear. It is a direct threat to their livelihood without immediate efficacy. It doesn't engage the ventromedial prefrontal cortex to process safety signals because they don't feel empowered. They just feel grossed out or defensive. But what if we applied Zahn and Ding's findings to our training? What if we used controlled recreational fear? Instead of boring them with a lecture or traumatizing them with gore, what if we put them in a high-fidelity, high-arousal simulation? Imagine a safety training session designed like an escape room. The stakes feel high, the clock is ticking, the alarms are sounding, and they have to troubleshoot a hazardous energy lockout under simulated pressure. Imagine using virtual reality where a worker is standing on a simulated I-beam 40 stories up, and they have to properly tie off while the wind is howling in their headset. They know they are safe. Their brain's ventromedial prefrontal cortex is processing those safety signals. It is a controlled environment, but the arousal is real. The physiological response is real. According to this fMRI data, that exact type of experience violently disrupts the default mode network. It forcefully pulls the worker out of autopilot and completely engages the Salience Network. We aren't trying to change their habit for 66 days by traumatizing them. We are literally practicing the neurological act of switching off the autopilot and turning on the hazard recognition system. We are exercising the Salience Network in a way that is highly engaging and hits that sweet spot on the inverted U curve of fear and pleasure. Now, like the authors of the study, I have to point out the limitations here. This brain reset is temporary. You cannot put a worker in a VR simulator on Monday and expect their default mode network to stay suppressed until Friday. It doesn't work that way. Furthermore, this has to be carefully controlled. If the simulation is too intense, you push past the peak of the inverted U curve. You move out of the recreational fear and back into threat appeal, causing distress and defensive avoidance. But the implication here is massive. We have empirical neuroimaging data showing us exactly how to snap a human brain out of its cognitive efficiency and force it to process the external environment. If we want to build real capacity in our workers, we need to stop blaming them for being complacent. We need to stop fighting human biology. Instead, we need to build training environments where workers can practice experiencing high arousal while maintaining their emotion regulation. Because when the real emergency happens, you want a worker who knows exactly what it feels like to transition from autopilot to hyperfocus without panicking. I'm going to leave you with that to chew on. I am incredibly grateful to my wife who sent this to me, and it just goes to show that if you silo yourself into only reading safety journals, you are going to miss out on the science that actually governs human behavior. Now that's it for this episode. I'm going to grab a glass of bourbon and see what my dogs are currently destroying in the living room. Oh, and one more thing. This whole episode completely validates a white paper I authored a few years ago on immersive training technology. It was published by a certain large MRO distributor for whom I used to work. Now, I can't say that it absolutely fucking nails the point like we just did in this episode, but it's a good read. Hit me up if you want a copy. As always, if you have research you want to share, a topic you want torn apart, or if you just want to argue with me about statistics, send me an email at contact@proveitpod.com. Until next time, I'm Dr. Matt Law. Stay skeptical, stay rigorous, and stay safe, everyone. Prove It To Me is produced by me, Matt Law. Original music by Wes London. You can find this podcast on Podbean, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. Like what you've heard so far? Please like, subscribe, and follow wherever you get your podcasts, and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. Got questions about what we talked about or research that you want to share? Send an email to contact@proveitpod.com. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the host and its guests and do not necessarily represent the official position, opinion, or strategies of their employers or companies. Examples of research and data analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based on very limited, often single-use case, and sometimes dated information. Assumptions made within this discussion about research and data analyses are not necessarily representative of the position of the host, the guests, or their employers or companies. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast. The presentation of the content by the guests does not necessarily constitute an active endorsement of the content by the host.